What does St Helier need? £120 million of private sector investment in 238 flats and a new apart hotel? We'll be finding out on today's Bailiwick News Pod with me, James Filleul. That's what Masurier is now proposing for a development called Les Sablons, which will sit between King Street and Broad Street on one side and Commercial Street on the other. With covered walkways and courtyards linking the two, the developers say their plans will regenerate a rundown area. It's not the first time this site has been in the news. You may remember J1, an office development that actually got planning permission, but in the end it didn't go ahead. And more recently, the site was almost the new government HQ. The Masurier will be hoping its third time lucky with Les Sablons. Their plans will be on show at the Town Hall from today until Saturday for this 2-acre development in the heart of St Helier. To take a look through them, I'm joined in the podcast studio by the firm's MD, Brian McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy, welcome to the pod. Now, set out exactly, firstly, which site we're talking about here when we're talking about Les Sablons.
So this is a 2-acre site, as you quite rightly put, between Broad Street and Commercial Street. So the properties on Commercial Street are from 19, 21, 23, 25, 27 and 29 Commercial Street and the former Barclays surface car park. And they extend all the way through to Broad Street, which is 31, 33, 35, 37, 39 and 41 Broad Street, which is the mortgage shop all the way through to the former Barclays property. Okay, so it's a substantial site. We're talking about 2 acres, but people will be able to imagine the shop names that you've spoken about there, and that extends all the way across that whole block to Commercial Street. So I mentioned 2 of the previous iterations. Let's maybe start with the history. I mean, firstly, J1, originally an office development. You've now moved away from an office. This is obviously residential plus some leisure. So on the J1 consent, which was 280,000 square foot of commercial office space, we were courting RBC at the time, who had a 150,000 square foot requirement in the market. We were competing with Dandara and JDC, and as we all know, they opted to go to the Dandara site at Gaspé House. So we revisited our plans, and in 2020, we ran through a government procurement route for a new government HQ. We got to the point where we appointed approved contractor, but there were some disagreements. I'm kind of bound by a confidentiality agreement, but it meant that project, for whatever reason, did not go ahead. We were looking at alternative options and just really identify what the island needs are in terms of the site. We know about tourism with the number of beds halved. We know about the hotel closures in and around St Helier. We also know about the chronic island shortage of housing, and particularly first-time buyer housing, when you look at the housing needs survey. So we talked to a number of hotel operators, and we've now got an agreement to lease with Stay City. But Stay City were actually in a really competitive position with 2 other potential occupiers wanting to come into St Helier, which I think demonstrates the strength of or the resurgence of the tourism industry and the lack of new stock in town. Okay, so we'll go through all of that in a second, but I just want to pick up on this point of the change in what you're proposing for it. So we went from offices to government offices now to mainly residential. Why do you think that will still work when obviously previously your head was much more around the commercial, the office-based development? I think the pandemic's had an impact in office accommodation. So globally, occupiers are reviewing their office strategies, and working from home is the norm in some cases. So the demand for that quantum of office space just isn't there, which has kind of forced us to look at alternatives. But as I say, when you consider a hotel and the chronic need for housing on the island, the whole concept of Les Sablons kind of morphed from that in terms of what is the market, what are we actually delivering for. But residential in that area, though, I mean, I need to just think quickly, but I can't think of any other homes along that stretch. So it's not a place where normally you'd find people living. The residential units will be above ground floor bars, cafes and restaurants. So if you picture certain squares in London perhaps where you've got the animation at ground floor level with the cafes, bars, restaurants, with the residential above, we're basically mirroring that. And because the site is sandwiched between the main retail pitch and the main office pitch, I think it would be a desirable place to live.
Okay. Le Masurier's focus has changed. So I remember we spoke some years ago now, and you said your focus was now going to be much more in the UK. Yet here you are with another multi-million-pound investment and development in Jersey. What's changed?
That was a decade ago, James, wasn't it? It seems like a long time ago. But yeah, we had a falling out with the planning department in 2011 when we were looking at a development on our Bath Street site. But things moved on. We came back around the table with the planners. We put forward a proposition for Merchant Square. Again, a tourism boost because that was underpinned by a Premier Inn coming to the island with their second hotel. That's now under construction. The hotel's about to open. Our direction in terms of investment, we're still heavily invested in the UK and throughout Europe, but we see opportunity now for investment in Les Sablons and in Merchant Square. And to combine these two projects, £200 million worth of projects.
Okay, let's look in a bit more detail about the particular project, the Les Sablons project. So we're talking about 238, I called them flats, obviously I'm sure you'd have a different name for them, but 238, 1, 2 and 3 bedroom.
That's right. And if you look at the housing needs survey in the owner-occupier category, there's a massive shortfall in 1, 2, 3 and 4 bed accommodation in that sector.
Okay.
And we've seen in Merchant Square, we've got 79 apartments still to sell in Merchant Square with a waiting list of over 1,200 people for those apartments. The demand is huge and there's a huge undersupply.
Okay. So you think there'll be, hostage to fortune on this, but you think they'll be relatively easy for you to sell those? They'll go quickly?
We have aimed to differentiate ourselves from the market. So although these are expensive apartments, that's the function of the market in Jersey, they are affordable relative to the competition. They're more generous in space. Every apartment has a balcony. We're creatively looking at office space within the development, so you've not sat at a PC on your kitchen table to when you're working from home, you do have a dedicated office space. So trying to be a bit creative to differentiate ourselves from the competition, which I think we've achieved in Merchant Square. I'm confident we will achieve in Les Sablons.
Okay, and what about the Apart Hotel? Tell us more about that.
So this is a wild apart hotel by Stay City, which is a fantastic concept because as well as beds, suites and apartments, they cater for business travellers that perhaps are on secondment, want longer stay durations, but also open up family holidays to Jersey, which is quite limited. Nobody wants to be necessarily staying in a single bedroom hotel room. So to have an apartment and the facilities associated with that will be more attractive, I think, to family long stay duration visitors.
And what about the competition with the rest of the tourism product in Jersey?
Well, I think it's healthy to have that competition. As you know, we're opening a Premier Inn in Merchant Square. As you travel around the UK and Europe, you kind of get these hospitality hubs where you might have a Premier Inn next to a Stay City, next to a Travel Lodge, next to an Ibis. And that's, I think that's healthy for Jersey, for its tourism industry and attracting visitors to the island.
But these will be self-catering though as well, so it's a different part of the offering.
They're serviced apartments. So they will be cleaned. There is guest laundry. There's a gym on site as well. Okay,
all right. So you're accepting it will compete, but that competition presumably brings everyone else's standards up as well.
Exactly that.
Okay, all right. So what else in the development? We talked about the apart hotel. We talked about the residential. What else?
There's 10,000 square foot of retail space for cafes, bars and restaurants. And we're talking to local operators and some UK national operators that have expressed an interest in coming into Les Sablons. I can't name any names at the moment, unfortunately, but there's some national UK operators that are very interested.
Okay, I mean the name itself, it tries to tie back to the facet of the sea wall being along that stretch of St Helier. How does this development protect that heritage?
So, Commercial Street is the historic shoreline of St Helier, and everything to the south of that has been reclaimed. The boats used to anchor up at Commercial Street, and then the properties we own were long, narrow warehouses. And Broad Street, being the oldest street in St Helier, was where the first shop fronts popped up, with the merchants selling their ware. There's a watercourse that runs from Pitt Street across the north of Les Sablons and down Conway Street, which was where the early settlement of St Helier began. But sand kept blowing in from the beach into the emerging town of St Helier. So back centuries ago, they erected what is now known as the Harbour Wall, which was a wall created from materials that could be found at the time to prevent the sand blowing in to the emerging town of St Helier, and hence Les Sablons, which translates as blowing sand, and will be respecting the harbour wall as part of the development.
What does that mean, though, exactly?
So it'll be a feature as the entrance into Les Sablons from Commercial Street will run alongside the harbour wall. You'll then come into a large landscape, vibrant courtyard. But the harbour wall, then there'll be a restaurant on site which will have an alfresco area respecting and observing the harbour wall, which will be lit, greenified. And also we've got 2 local artists who are internationally acclaimed, providing artwork that will complement the harbour wall and indeed the facades on Broad Street.
Okay. I mean, it's been, you're going to use the word controversial site over the last couple of years through COVID. Obviously, the closing of Broad Street has been a subject which we've covered extensively on Bailiwick Express, and people have commented on a lot. You know, there were lots of issues around that. Does this development rely on Broad Street being pedestrianised?
It doesn't rely on Broad Street being pedestrianised, and frankly, that's outside of our direct control. What I would say, though, if Broad Street was permanently pedestrianised, then there's synergy with Les Sablons, and the opportunity actually to create, if you think about King Street, Broad Street, and our new street, to create a centralised core, pedestrianised core of St Helier, particularly with the Charing Cross and the emerging parade, potential pedestrianisation leading up to the new States HQ. So most towns and cities have a central pedestrianised core to them, and this is an opportunity to do that in a joined-up fashion.
Okay, so just to be really clear on this, the development will go ahead anyway, whether or not Broad Street is pedestrianised, but it is something you would support?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So what about the effect on the rest of, well, perhaps not the rest of St Helier, but St Helier around that development? So say this does go ahead, you've got your display at the town hall over the next couple of days, then you have to go through the planning process. So we're still a few years away from completion, at least. Get to that point, it happens. What do you then see happening around it in St Helier?
If we submit a planning application then by the end of this month, we would reasonably expect consent by September. So under construction Q1 23, completion end of 25. It's difficult to project that far forward in terms of the immediate environment, but I think given the quantum of investment and the fact that we'll have visitors, residents, tourists on site, I think it'll only complement the surrounding environment and hopefully create what we're aiming to create is a vibrant core of St Helier.
What do you see the problems with this? I'm sure you've sat and considered where this might go wrong. So as it goes through the planning process, what are you concerned about?
Do you know, that's a really difficult one. There are so many virtues of Les Sablons. In the past, we've had issues with heritage, but we're actually respecting the harbour wall and the facades on Broad Street. So we don't have a heritage issue. We're actually enhancing the features that are there. The height and massing is all protected within the J1 consent. So we're no taller or bigger in mass than the consent that we've already got. So it's actually difficult. I can't say. I think this is a great thing for St Helier and a great thing for the island.
Okay, and you've got your display at the town hall for the next 3 days?
That's correct, yeah.
Brian McCarthy, thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, James.
That was the Masurier's MD, Brian McCarthy. Remember, you can see the Les Sablons plans at the town hall until Saturday. You can also check out our sister Politics pod, which this week is with Senator Tracy Valois. You can find that and this pod in all the usual pod places. Please do remember to like and share if you can. It really helps. And you can stay up to date with all the latest news, investigations and features at bailiwickexpress.com or on one of our DAB and online radio stations. That's it from the News Pod this week. Thanks for listening.